Okay. All right. So we're gonna go through bureaucracy. So this is the next chapter. Y'all, when's your test? You want to test on?
I think it's the 19th.
1 week. So you have a test on the 18th.
Oh, man.
Okay. So y'all have a test in 1 week. So that means you should have a quiz tonight and then like multiple days to do another discussion, then a test on the 18th, and then we'll sort of move on. All right. So bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is very important. It's cumbersome and sometimes it sucks, but it's very, very important. Right? Because bureaucracy is what oversees a significant amount of what actually happens in the United States. In reality, bureaucracy is, I actually refer to bureaucracy as being the fourth branch of government. And so what I mean when I say that, when I say bureaucracy is the fourth branch of government, they are a non-elected entity, but they are the ones that are sort of tasked with carrying out all sorts of responsibilities, right? Again, when we go back to like third grade, and we go back to third grade, we should have learned in third grade that like Congress writes laws, right? Like they make laws, the court interprets laws, and the president enforces laws, right? Remember that from third grade? Maybe. Seventh, whatever. I don't know what year you learned that. Okay. What I need you to understand though is obviously the president is one man, right? The president is one individual. He's not the one that's actually enforcing laws. The enforcement of laws is done in large part by the bureaucracy. And you couple that with the fact that in this day and age, we have Congress that passes laws that are incredibly wordy, incredibly lengthy. The Affordable Care Act is an example. The Affordable Care Act was over 1,000 pages. And over 1,000 pages of rules and regulations regarding health care. Ultimately, it generally becomes the responsibility of the bureaucracy to determine what they're actually doing, right? Like what they're actually implementing and how it's going to be implemented. And some basic features of bureaucracy or characteristics. Okay, there are a wide variety of professionals that work in the bureaucracy, right? So the Department of Agriculture will have like scientists in it. It will have farmers in it. The Health and Human Services has doctors. There's just a vast number of sort of professions that can work for the bureaucracy. And ultimately, in order for the bureaucracy to be successful, there has to be some coordinated efforts, which doesn't always happen. And the purpose here is basically to implement laws. So laws have been written by Congress. The bureaucracy is now going to implement it. They're going to administer and enforce those laws. Right. So again, if Congress writes a law about, I don't know, the decrease of carbon dioxide emissions from automobiles, right? The Environmental Protection Agency is going to be the bureaucratic agency that oversees those new vehicles that are being manufactured, right? And whether or not those vehicles meet those new guidelines. They also have enforcement authority. And so bureaucratic authority or bureaucratic regulation is basically the idea that they're going to enforce laws. Again, like you can basically get a ticket from the EPA if you are violating sort of environmental protection standards. And then the bureaucracy can be fairly innovative as well. In fact, if you think about bureaucracy in terms of like the Department of Defense, right? Because that's one of our bureaucratic agencies. And just so you understand, like the Department of Defense is what is responsible for radio and internet and all sorts of other technologies that are now sort of standard in our life. And in order to become a bureaucrat, you generally take a standardized test, and then you're hired based upon your merit. And so, for instance, if you wanted to be, let's just say you wanted to work for the FBI, right? With the FBI, there would be all sorts of different things that would go into factoring whether or not you were hired. And then most of these, through the Civil Service Act, most of them have like a score that they create. And so there's a variation in terms of how like individual entities within the bureaucracy, how they create their score. But the Department of Justice, for instance, or the FBI, they probably take a number of things into account, right? Like your proficiency with firearms, your understanding of the law, like a written test that says how well you understand the law, your physical fitness, all sorts of things like that that can then be taken into account. And then there's just a list created, like you finish first, you finish second, you finish third. If they've got 20 jobs, they count down 20 spots on the list, draw a line. If you're above that line, you get a job. If you're below that line, you don't. Okay. To give you sort of a local bureaucratic understanding of that, New York City firefighters, right? New York City firefighters, if you want to become a New York City firefighter, you take a standardized test, right? You have a fitness score. And then I think there's one other aspect to it. My old roommate in the Marine Corps was a New York City firefighter. He was a volunteer New York City firefighter who was trying to become a full-time New York City firefighter. He joined the Marine Corps solely so that he could get like the 10 bonus points on that little like cut score, because veterans get bonuses sometimes depending on what entity you're looking at. So yeah, lucky for him, if he had not joined the Marine Corps, he would actually probably be dead today, because he and I were on active duty when 9/11 happened. So like he would have gone into the World Trade Center as a volunteer firefighter and probably died there had he not joined the Marine Corps. But yeah, so that gives you an idea of how they're hired. The idea here is with the bureaucracy, it should be based on merit. You should be qualified for the job that you get, right? If you work for any part of the bureaucracy in lower levels, you've taken that test, you've got your job, you're qualified, you're the one that's sort of doing things. At the very, very upper echelon of it, sure, we do still have some remnants of the spoils system. The spoils system is something that you should have learned about in a U.S. history class, right? Where basically, we'll just use a hypothetical here for a second. Let's just say that your family had like billions of dollars, and so you donated millions of dollars to a Republican candidate, right? And you helped that Republican candidate become president of the United States. And so then they take over as president of the United States and like, hey, we're going to turn around and hook you up with a job. And so then they decide, like, I don't know, we'll make you Secretary of Education, right? And then you look at that person and, well, okay, is that person a teacher or an administrator? Have they ever worked in education? No. Okay. Have they ever gone to public school? No. Sent their children to public school? No. Written a FAFSA grant? No. Stepped foot in a public school? No. Right? Like, you understand that spoil system then. That person is grossly unqualified for the job, right? Like literally, we shouldn't have a Secretary of Education who has never stepped foot in a public school until they became Secretary of Education. You understand that conceptually? You also understand that that's not hypothetical, right? That's actually Betsy DeVos, current Secretary of Education, had never stepped foot in a public school until she became Secretary of Education. That's the spoil system. Okay. Now look, the spoil system is not, we'll take another Trump example, right? The spoil system is not Jeff Sessions, right? Jeff Sessions is former senator from the state of Alabama. He was one of the first Republicans to endorse Trump. And when Trump took office, Sessions became the attorney general, right? So he headed up the Justice Department. Now, look at Jeff Sessions' resume, right? Senator from Alabama, former prosecutor, has a law degree, right? Worked for the Justice Department. You understand he's qualified for that job. You might dislike him, you might dislike Donald Trump, but he was qualified for the job that he was appointed to, unlike Betsy DeVos. So one would be remnants of the spoil system, the other would not. Right? The other would simply be a political appointee to a position for which they're actually qualified. The size of the bureaucracy, our bureaucracy is fairly large. And if you ever wanted to be a part of it, you could obviously go through sort of the process. I mean, if you wanted to be a U.S. bureaucrat as a part of the State Department, where you go and work, as a foreign service officer, right? So you go work in the U.S. Embassy in Rome, which, to be honest with you, if I wasn't a teacher and I had to pick a job, that kind of sounds cool, right? And you would go and you would take the test. For that one, in that example, you generally have roughly 20,000 people a year that take that test, and the vast majority of them do not pass the test, which means they're not even qualified. Our federal bureaucracy, right? So our bureaucracy at the national level, meaning in Washington, D.C., has actually not grown much in the last 35 years, which is kind of contrary to what people believe, in part because we've created new bureaucratic agencies in the last 35 years. We've created the Department of Homeland Security, for instance, as a direct result of 9/11, right? So the Department of Homeland Security is not even 20 years old yet. Yet what we have done is we have simply reorganized the bureaucracy. We have not increased the size of the bureaucracy. And again, here's an example. Look at the Coast Guard, right? You know what the Coast Guard is, yes? We're all aware of what the Coast Guard is. Is the Coast Guard a part of the military? No. The Coast Guard is a part of the Department of Homeland Security, right? Now, obviously, the Coast Guard has existed for much longer than the Department of Homeland Security, which began in 2003. So prior to the Department of Homeland Security being in existence, where did the Coast Guard fall? Was it part of the Department of Defense and the military? No. Believe it or not, it was a part of the Department of Transportation. Okay? So that should give you an idea here to help you understand that we're not necessarily increasing the size of the bureaucracy as government has increased its scope of what it's doing, but rather we're simply reorganizing it. Now, we also have significantly increased the size of bureaucracy at the local level, right? So state and local bureaucracy has gone up over the course of time. And those numbers there, the difference between 1968 and 2014, that should give you an idea, right? Our federal bureaucracy in terms of civilian employees is roughly the same, although we drastically decreased military personnel. Now, that's a little bit misleading because 1968 is the height of the Vietnam War, right? We still have a military draft. So those 3.6 million military personnel, that's probably not the fairest comparison, okay, to the 1.5 that we have today. This just shows you the percentage of the workforce that is in federal service, right? So again, while the actual numbers have been relatively flat, right, we've pretty much maintained the same number of people in the bureaucracy. Obviously, we know that the U.S. population has drastically increased, right, over the last 50, 60 years. Well, I mean, forever. Like our population is constantly rising. And so what that means is the population is going up and the number of bureaucrats is staying the same. Percentage wise, it's actually going down. It makes up a smaller percentage now. The part of the bureaucracy that you really sort of need to understand, at least as it pertains to this class, is really the cabinet, right? The cabinet is a part of the executive branch. Okay, so again, Betsy DeVos is a cabinet level member, right? She is the Secretary of Education. I'm gonna be honest with you, it's hard to keep up with all of Trump's peoples. Mike Pompeo is the Secretary of State. I know that one. I'm pretty sure Trump just fired the Secretary of Defense like yesterday.
Yeah.
Was it yesterday?
Yeah.
So who knows who's running the Defense Department at this point? William Barr is the Attorney General, which is the head of the Justice Department. Okay. Within the cabinet, we have basically secretaries of 15 different departments. And not all departments are equal, right? The State Department is really, really important. That oversees foreign affairs. The Department of Defense is really, really important. That oversees defense, obviously. The Department of Justice, the DOJ, is really important. That oversees sort of law enforcement. Department of the Interior is pretty important. That's sort of Secretary of State, except it deals with just the United States, whereas the Secretary of State deals with foreign countries. Then you also have other departments, like the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Not that important, right? Health and Human Services, right? Probably not quite as important, okay? But these 15 departments make up the cabinet. There are some other cabinet members that are not a part of that. Like technically the vice president is a cabinet member. But your secretaries have deputy secretaries that are immediately under them. And then our bureaucracy is structured very much like a sort of pyramid, right? Like there's a very hierarchical, I can't say that word. There's a hierarchy. You know what that word means, right? Like one dude at the top, and then there's like three dudes under him. And then each of those three dudes have like three dudes under them. And then all the way down until you get to people like me, because you understand I'm a bureaucrat, right? Yes, no. True or false? I work for the government. True. I work for local government. That technically, by definition, technically makes me a bureaucrat. By the way, you know what the difference is? Is Ted Cruz a bureaucrat? You know who Ted Cruz is, right? Your senator? Is he a bureaucrat?
No.
Why not?
Because it's a different part of government. A different branch.
It's not just because it's a different branch of government, it's because he's elected. That's really sort of the way we offset that. Bureaucrats would be non-elected government officials. Right? On some level, you could really count the Supreme Court as bureaucrats. Even though it's their own branch of government, they're still kind of bureaucrats. Okay? All right, so we have the whole hierarchy. Next, independent agencies. Okay, independent agencies are not really a part of the cabinet. Independent agencies, they still have like agency heads. They still operate sort of like bureaucracies, but they're usually very, very specific in what they do, right? So like NASA is a pretty good example, right? So the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, right? They're not a cabinet, but there is like a head of NASA. There's still somebody that's overseeing that, and they're still responsible for sort of the public good as it pertains to, you know, space travel and relations with alien species or whatever. I don't know what NASA does. Right? They go and study the moon, I guess. I don't know. Executive corporations and commissions. So again, this is another part of bureaucracy, but it's a little bit different. Good examples here would actually be things like Amtrak or the post office, right? USPS. USPS would be government corporations. They are government agencies that are market funded, right? So you understand the U.S. Postal Service does not get a budget from the government. Do you know this? No? So how does the U.S. Postal Service operate? No, that would be government money. By people paying to ship things. Right? Every time you buy stamps, that money goes directly to the post office. Every time you ship a package, that money goes directly to the post office. The post office then takes those funds and uses them to meet their operating expenses. Theoretically. They can get government bailout sometimes, but that's how they're supposed to. Okay. Executive commissions. Commissions are basically rulemaking bodies that are supposed to exist outside of politics. I'm gonna be honest with you, they don't exist outside of politics. And net neutrality is probably a really good example for you to understand with that, right? Y'all know what net neutrality is? Net neutrality is the concept of whether or not the internet should be like a public commodity or whether or not it is a private commodity. Okay, the difference between a public commodity and a private commodity means a private commodity is controlled by individuals that basically have like wealth, right? That are in the controlling sphere of it. Public commodities are commodities controlled by the government. Water is generally a public commodity, right? You have like government companies that control water because obviously if you stop giving people water, they would die, right? So companies probably shouldn't be trying to profit off of that. The idea with net neutrality, and that's the Federal Communications Commission that oversees that, is the internet something that is supposed to be free to everybody, or is the internet something that is private? Oh, not free to everybody. You have to pay. You still have to pay for government services like that. But it is something that should be equally accessible to everybody in all like entities, or is it something that can be controlled by like a private market? Right? You should understand. You know that net neutrality failed. Yes. You know what that actually means? Yeah, let's think about it this way, and because the internet and cable would be fairly good comparisons in this regard. And how many of you have cable at your house? You got television? Well, that's probably true of a lot of you, but you used to, right? You at least used to have cable, right? How many channels did you get? Caleb, just give me a guess. 300, 700, 1,500. Caleb, how many channels did you watch? Like 4. Hey, I have no idea how many channels I get at the house. I really don't. I'm gonna guess I get probably close to like 500, right? How many channels do I personally watch? Like all of the ESPNs, because I'll literally watch any sport. I don't care. Like I would watch competitive underwater basket weaving if it was a real thing. No, I wouldn't. But like I love sports. I'll watch any sport, right? The occasional, like maybe CNN and Fox News from time to time. Yeah, that's it. Like that's yeah, that's it. Right? But I'm paying for all manner of channels that I don't use. And even once I take like my wife into account, because then I would have to have a Hallmark channel. Because my wife loves them Hallmark Christmas movies. But yeah, like then even taking her into account and my children and like Disney Junior and Nick Jr. and all that stuff, right? There's still literally hundreds of channels that we don't watch at all. right? Yet I have to pay for them. And I have to pay for them because there's other channels that I want, and the internet company, or excuse me, the cable company sells them as a package. And the elimination of net neutrality can allow the internet to look like cable, meaning at your house, like you want Snapchat, okay, that's this package, right? You want TikTok, oh, that's not in the same package as Snapchat. So now you got to pick, what would you rather have, TikTok or Snapchat? Or are you going to pay more for your internet so that you can get both of them? Okay. Additionally, you could have individual companies like Snapchat or TikTok that could pay internet providers to be like, hey, I'm going to pay you extra money and you'll speed my service up, right? Or more nefariously, they might be like, hey, I'll pay you extra money if you slow somebody else down, right? Because think about it, y'all all use the internet, right? Like, how irritating is it when you click on an internet page and it doesn't load? Like, you wait 2 seconds and then you're ready to like throw your computer or phone or tablet. Man, it sucks, right? Because we're just so used to it being so fast, right? So if you knew, like, well, CNN news like doesn't load very fast, but MSNBC news loads really fast, you're like, well, I'm gonna stop using CNN because I'm not waiting on that. Okay, that's all a result of like what could be net neutrality, which is not a good thing. Right? Because the federal election commissions are supposed to operate independent of politics. That being said, you all know who the head of the FCC is? And at least the dude that was the head of the FCC a couple years ago, I think he's still technically the head of the FCC. I don't think his tenure has ended yet. But it's a dude named Ajit Pai, who prior to becoming the head of the FCC worked for Verizon. I promise you, when he's done being the head of the FCC, you know where he's going to go get a job again? Verizon, right? Who stands to gain the most with the elimination of net neutrality? Verizon, or companies like that that provide internet, whether it's Verizon, Comcast, Xfinity, whoever. And the bureaucracy should be responsible for promoting public welfare. So they do all sorts of things like build infrastructure. The Department of Transportation, for instance, is over like road maintenance and things like that. But you also have stuff like the National Park Service that's wonderful and promotes general welfare because we have like all of this national land that if you've never been to like a national park, I really do advise you go. Like, even if you're like, I'm not outdoorsy, right? Or if you're one of those people that's like, I'm outdoorsy in the sense that I like to sit on patios and like drink lemonade, right? Like, if that's your idea of being outdoorsy, you should still go to like Yosemite or Yellowstone or something like that at least once in your life because it's good. And again, things like environmental policy, same concept, right? The bureaucratic agencies that are implementing environmental policy are doing so for the general welfare of the people, right? Like, you understand that in the 1970s, the Ohio, first of all, you don't know where the Ohio River is? No? We don't know where the Ohio River is? Okay, so look, this right here is the Ohio River. It leaves Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It makes up the border of West Virginia and Ohio, and then Ohio and Kentucky, and then Kentucky and Indiana until it flows into the Mississippi here. And back in the 1970s, right, and West Virginia owns the Ohio River here. Technically, it's a part of West Virginia, not a part of Ohio. Okay, but West Virginia is a big coal mining state. Coal is like very bad. It's dirty. Okay, the Ohio River got so dirty in the 1970s that it caught fire. I need you to appreciate that for a moment. A river was literally on fire. Kaylee back there confused. Water doesn't burn, right? Like, that's what you're thinking. You're like, how could that be? Water doesn't burn. That can't be right. It's because there was so much like soot and filth and debris and oil and stuff like that. That first of all, oil and water don't mix, right? Oil floats on top of water. Oil burns. So you've got the river down here and the oil on top of it that caught fire. Like literally a river was on fire. And so here's the thing. So like understand, because we can talk about environmental protection and like policy as it pertains to that. And the last unit is public policy. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, right? Regardless of what you think about like the Environmental Protection Agency or public policy or things like that, you should understand that we have made massive like strides and gains on cleaning up the United States, right? I mean, in the 70s, we had a river that would catch fire. Go at some point in time in your life, go try to find a picture of New York City in 1980, right? Like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you might be able to see one on a sunny day with no clouds. You might be able to see one block down the road in New York because there was so much haze and fog. And you go back many, many, many years ago, right? In a place like Pittsburgh, which is a big steel town, and a lot of steel mills, right? Pittsburgh used to have to run the street lamps in the middle of the day. Street lamps on in the middle of the day because there was so much like smog and soot and just junk in the air that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you couldn't see the sun. And you needed street lights. Like we don't live like that anymore, which is a very positive thing, right? Very positive thing. Hey, all of these different bureaucratic agencies, they have different responsibilities, right? But they're all linked to like a specific group or specific. So like Department of Justice, it's linked to justice. Department of Defense, it's linked to defense. The Department of Veterans Affairs, right? So that veterans have like resources. Right, Department of Agriculture, right, promoting the interests of farmers. Department of Transportation, overseeing like the interstate highway system. Okay, these bureaucracies are a part of our sort of system of iron triangles, right? Because again, we talked a little bit about iron triangles, right? We have the interest group, and then we have the Congress, and now we have the bureaucracy. Because the interest group is trying to influence Congress to pass laws. Congress passes laws, the bureaucracy then goes and implements those laws. So it's all a part of the same thing. These are just some examples of it, right? Of different iron triangles, right? Whether it's the Department of Veterans Affairs, the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and then like the American Legion or the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, those are interest groups that are trying to promote veterans issues. Okay. The Department of Homeland Security was created in 2002. Again, it's one of our newer examples of a bureaucratic agency that's created. It's the result of 9/11, and it's an attempt to try to consolidate some things in terms of how we reorganize our bureaucracy, right? Because you need to understand that prior to 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security, like we had the CIA and FBI and military intelligence and all these different entities that didn't necessarily talk to one another, right? There was no coordination to ensure that things were going on the way they should, right? I'll let you look through these graphics on your own. External national security, again, this is Department of Defense. So this is just another example of an individual bureaucratic agency and what it does. The Department of Defense should be relatively easy for you to understand because they promote defense, but they also will work with other agencies at various times, right? So like the Department of Defense also works with the State Department because the State Department deals with other countries as well. The State Department tries to deal with it diplomatically, right? If the Department of Defense gets involved, it is no longer diplomatic. Because now the military is going in and they're just trying to kill people because that's what the military does, or what the military should do. And obviously, our bureaucracy is not without flaw. and it's not without controversy. Um, our bureaucracy will do things that we don't always approve of or like. There's a wide variety of people in America that do not like sort of American military personnel being in other countries, right? Or what they see as sort of endless wars or regime change wars. But there's also, on the flip side of that, there's some evidence that the U.S. being involved in places like Iraq or Afghanistan are actually beneficial to the welfare and security in the United States. The bureaucracy is responsible on some level for the economy, but not as much as you might think. Okay? Because the bureaucracy has no say over like taxing and spending. That's all done by Congress, right? And the Fed, which is the Federal Reserve, is sort of part of the bureaucracy. It's an independent agency, but it deals with monetary policy. Congress deals with fiscal policy, which is taxing and spending. And so the government doesn't really like it. We'll talk about economic policy in the next unit when we talk about policy. The government doesn't really run economic policy, but it has some aspect to it. And the Federal Reserve, as far as the economy goes, the bureaucracy with the economy, you do need to understand this one. Because basically the Federal Reserve oversees the monetary supply. Like they lend money to banks, and then banks turn around and lend that out, and that's all supposed to create like economic growth and things like that. That the Fed also dictates interest rates. That being said, the Fed can be very manipulative in terms of trying to regulate the economy. We currently have a Fed that has, for the last almost decade now, just artificially lowered interest rates in order to try to promote economic growth, which is probably not a good thing because you've got people that are accumulating more debt than they can handle because interest rates are so low. Okay? The IRS is a bureaucratic agency that is responsible for like collecting taxes, but ultimately Congress is responsible for like setting tax rates and things like that. There are other bureaucratic agencies like the Department of Agriculture that can influence the economy by trying to help dictate farming practices and farming rates and things like that. And is our bureaucracy efficient? No, not really. Can it be reformed? Possibly. There's always some ideas for sort of drastic reform, but you'd have to realize too that like if you abolish like the IRS and a whole bunch of other entities like some Republicans would like to see, you would kill a whole bunch of jobs, right? And then that would actually have a negative detrimental impact upon the economy, right? So these are just some different ways that you could get rid of it, right? Again, termination is one of those, but that generally doesn't work. And for the most part, Americans like their individual agencies, especially the agencies that are working for them, right? Like most Americans would be like, yeah, we can get rid of the Department of Veterans Affairs because most Americans aren't vets. But obviously the vets don't want to get rid of that because it's beneficial to them, right? Devolution is another way to do it, which is basically just shifting from the national bureaucracy to state bureaucracy. But state governments can't really run deficits like the national government can, so that's not necessarily feasible. Okay, and then privatization would sort of be your third idea. Privatization has its own issues. Again, Republicans would probably be in favor of it, but if you privatize something like Social Security, ultimately you'd have a whole bunch of stupid people that went out and lost all their money, and then they would have no Social Security, they'd have no retirement, and they'd be like, I need retirement, I need money, and that doesn't really work. All right, so that basically takes us to the end what we need to cover today. So you've got a quiz tonight, and then what, you have a discussion starting tomorrow? Yeah. And then we're almost done. You know, there's like 2 actual weeks left in this class, right? Yeah, 2 actual weeks left. Like after we get through this week. Because December 4th is like the last day of class, and then we move into finals week. Because
I thought we had like a test and stuff on.
you do. You have a test and a paper and a final all on finals week. Because I'm gonna keep you here that whole week. And then the following week, when it's George Ranch finals, like then you don't have to be here anymore. I mean, I can't tell you that, but like. Well, like you know, like once, like come on, y'all are all seniors. Like once you fill in your exemption form, what do you do?
Stay home, don't come back to school.
Yeah. Okay. Exemptions work this year based on grade and behavior. There's no attendance requirement for it. Yeah. All right, guys, I got to stop this. Hopefully you got what you needed, and then I'm gonna post it when we're done. All right.